Every so often, we wonder how we'd react if faced with life or death circumstances, fighting tooth and nail through unthinkable dangers to survive. But beyond our wildest dreams, some individuals have demonstrated that the will to live can overcome even the most unconquerable odds. From Douglas Mawson's harrowing Antarctic expedition to the infamous Andes airplane crash, here are the 15 real-life survival stories that will leave you simply speechless. Let's start off with number 15, Aron Ralston. If you've seen the movie 127 Hours, you know how Aron's story ends. But if you haven't, well, be ready because it's a bit creepy. In 2003, Aron was hiking alone in Blue John Canyon, Utah, when a boulder fell and pinned his right arm to the canyon wall. For 5 days, he rationed his meager supplies of water and snacks, hoping someone would miraculously find him. Sadly, his remote location and failure to tell anyone about his trip meant no one was coming. Facing death, Ralston made a gut-wrenching decision. He amputated his own arm with a dull, multi-tool knife. Freed but severely injured, he trekked 7 miles back toward civilization. Along the way, he encountered a family who contacted rescuers. Ralston lost 40 pounds during his ordeal and somehow avoided bleeding to death. His survival wasn't just a testament to physical endurance, but also sheer mental strength. And let's be real. Would you do something this crazy to save your life? Number 14, the Robertson family. In 1971, Dougal Robertson, a British dairy farmer, set sail with his wife and 4 children on a schooner, Lucette, for an adventure he called the University of Life. For 17 months, the family enjoyed smooth sailing, exploring the world, and learning the ropes of life at sea. But in 1972, off the Galapagos Islands, disaster struck when killer whales attacked their boat, splintering it. With the Lucette sinking fast, the Robertsons scrambled into a lifeboat and dinghy with just 6 days' worth of food. Adrift in the vast Pacific, they survived by collecting rainwater, catching turtles, and enduring extreme hunger and exposure. After 16 days, their lifeboat became unusable, forcing the family into a small, overcrowded dinghy. For 38 grueling days, they clung to life until they were finally rescued by Japanese fishermen on July 23, 1972. Well, it is a pretty brave family. Number 13, the Andes Miracle. In 1972, a Uruguayan rugby team's plane crash-landed in the Andes Mountains after the pilot made a navigation error. Basically the kind you really can't walk off. Out of 45 passengers, 29 initially survived the crash. Stranded at a lung-busting 11,500 feet without so much as a phone call to let anyone know where they were, they endured some of the most brutal conditions imaginable for over 2 months. Starvation forced them to make the horrifying decision to eat the frozen remains of their fallen friends, a choice none of us would want to make but can't stop thinking about. When it became clear they were as far from rescue as Pluto is from Earth, 2 survivors strapped on their courage and trekked through deadly mountains for 10 days with 0 training and no gear. Miraculously, they found a shepherd who alerted authorities. By the end of it all, only 16 survivors remained. This jaw-dropping tale of sheer will and resourcefulness left the world in awe, proving that even in the face of impossible odds, humans will fight tooth and nail to stay alive. Number 12. Desert Mechanic. In 1993, French electrician Émile Larrey was living every car owner's nightmare in the middle of the Sahara Desert. His Citroën 2CV broke down after an unfortunate run-in with a rock. Stranded with enough food and water for just 10 days and not a soul in sight, Larrey decided to channel his inner MacGyver. He disassembled his car and Frankensteined the parts into a makeshift motorcycle. After 12 long days, half a liter of water left and probably wondering what in the world he'd gotten himself into, He managed to escape and rode his homemade contraption to the nearest village. His ingenious feat barely made the news at the time, but let's face it, building a motorcycle from your car in the middle of a desert deserves more than a round of applause. It earned him the title, the Extreme Mechanic, and honestly, we couldn't agree more. Number 11, Jose Salvador Alvarenga. In 2012, Salvadoran fisherman Jose embarked on a routine fishing trip off Mexico's coast. But what followed was anything but routine. Alvarenga and his crewmate, Ezequiel Cordoba, were hit by a violent storm that disabled their boat's electronics and motor, leaving them adrift in the vast Pacific. With no rescue in sight, they survived on a grisly diet of raw fish, turtles, jellyfish, rainwater, and turtle blood. After months of this harsh existence, Cordoba succumbed to illness, leaving Alvarenga alone. For an astonishing 13 months, Alvarenga drifted across the Pacific, covering an estimated 5,500 to 6,700 miles. Despite isolation and unimaginable conditions, he clung to life until spotting a remote island. Swimming ashore, he was discovered by locals in the Marshall Islands. His survival defied all odds and made history as the longest recorded instance of being lost at sea. Today, Alvarenga shares his story as a testament to human resilience and survival instincts. Number 10, Arctic Heroine. Ada Blackjack, an Inupiat woman, joined what could only be described as a doomed expedition to Wrangel Island in 1921. Her job? Cook and seamstress. What she didn't sign up for? Well, becoming the sole survivor of an underprepared mission that could have used a lot more planning and a lot less blind optimism. The goal was to claim the island for Canada, even though it technically belonged to Russia. But things quickly went south, or rather, froze solid. Supplies ran out, hunting was a bust, and one member of the team succumbed to scurvy. The other three set off to find help and promptly disappeared, leaving Ada alone with nothing but her wits, a few supplies, and the expedition's cat for company. Over 8 freezing months, Ada taught herself to hunt foxes and sew reindeer skin parkas to survive. She was finally rescued in August 1923 and hailed as a real-life Robinson Crusoe, but with better sewing skills and way more guts. Number 9, trapped in an air bubble. In 2013, Harrison O'Keefe, a Nigerian cook, was aboard the Jascon 4 tugboat assisting an oil tanker when rough seas capsized the vessel. The ship sank to the seafloor, 100 feet deep, trapping Harrison in a tiny air pocket in pitch-black freezing water. Clinging to hope, Harrison endured nearly 3 days of isolation, cold and darkness, with no food and only a can of Coca-Cola to sustain him. As the hours dragged on, his air supply thinned, and he feared rescue would never come. Miraculously, divers surveying the wreck heard him hammering on the hull. When they found him alive, they couldn't believe their eyes. Harrison was carefully rescued, placed in a decompression chamber, and brought safely to the surface. In a twist of fate, Harrison later trained as a professional diver, working on underwater installations for oil and gas companies. From being inches away from death to thriving underwater, Harrison's story is the definition of resilience. Number 8, Sir Douglas Mawson. In 1912, Australian geologist Sir Douglas Mawson embarked on an ambitious Antarctic expedition, but it quickly became a battle for survival. Mawson and 2 companions, Belgrave Ninnis and Xavier Mertz, ventured 300 miles into Antarctica's unforgiving interior. Tragedy struck when Ninnis fell into a crevasse with their sled, taking most of their supplies. The remaining men faced weeks of hardship, relying on starvation rations and even eating their sled dogs. Mertz eventually died from exhaustion and suspected vitamin A poisoning from the dog's liver. Alone, frostbitten, and near death, Mawson pushed on for 30 days through brutal conditions to reach base camp, only to discover the rescue ship had left hours earlier. While celebrated as a survival hero, Mawson's story is not without controversy. Some speculate he may have rationed supplies in a way that hastened Mertz's death or even resorted to cannibalism. Despite the allegations, Mawson's perseverance cemented him as a polar legend, and his face now graces Australia's $100 bill. Number 7. Ricky McGee. As once a wise old dude said, sometimes life just doesn't play fair. Ricky McGee learned this the hard way in 2006 when a drive through the Australian outback turned into a survival nightmare. After picking up a group of hitchhikers, the next thing he knew, he woke up in a shallow grave, wrapped in plastic, with dingoes scratching at him like he was a to-go meal. Lost, carless, and disoriented, McGee had to survive for 71 brutal days in the unforgiving wilderness. He built a basic shelter, known as a humpy, out of branches and leaves, while dining on frogs, leeches, and snakes, washed down with the occasional sip of his own urine. At night, he used rocks to block dingoes from making him dinner. When cattle ranch workers finally found him, McGee was skeletal, having lost over 100 pounds. His car and the full story of what happened remain a mystery. Number 6. Falling from the sky. In 1972, Serbian flight attendant Vesna Vulovic survived the impossible, a fall from 33,000 feet after her plane exploded mid-air. The explosion tore the plane apart, but Vesna's fall was cushioned by a snowy mountainside, which miraculously saved her life. She was found alive by a local villager, battered but breathing. Vesna sustained severe injuries, including a fractured skull, broken legs, and temporary amnesia from the incident. Despite the odds, she recovered and returned to normal life, though she carried the physical reminders of her fall, including a limp. Vesna credited her survival to her Serbian stubbornness and joked that her childhood diet of chocolate, spinach, and fish oil might have played a part. She holds the Guinness World Record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute and remains a symbol of incredible luck and human resilience. Number 5. Lost at sea. In 1981, Stephen Callahan set off on what was supposed to be a solo sailing adventure aboard his self-built boat, Napoleon Solo. But, as fate would have it, his boat decided it wasn't up for the challenge and collided with something during a night storm. Callahan, however, didn't sink with it. Instead, he scrambled onto his life raft and went full survival mode, diving into the sinking boat multiple times to grab whatever stuff he could. Over the next 76 days, he drifted westward with the trade winds, facing sharks, raft punctures, and the kind of isolation that makes you start chatting with seagulls. Using solar stills to turn seawater drinkable and surviving on a seafood buffet of fish, barnacles, and seabirds, he somehow held on. His emergency beacon and flare gun might as well have been invisible to passing ships, but eventually, near the island of Marie Galante, fishermen spotted his raft, thanks to the birds hovering above like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. After his rescue, Callahan channeled his ordeal into designing better life rafts. Number 4. The Amazon Nightmare. On Christmas Eve, 1971, just one day after her high school graduation, 17-year-old Julianne Kupka boarded Lansa Flight 508 with her mother, heading to a biological research station in the Amazon rainforest. What started as a routine flight turned into a nightmare when the plane was struck by lightning and literally tore apart mid-air. Still strapped to her seat, Julianne plummeted 10,000 feet into the jungle, a height that would terrify most birds, and somehow survived with only minor injuries. Alone in the dense Amazon, she navigated the wild for 11 days, relying on a river's course to lead her somewhere, anywhere, with humans. Eventually, she stumbled upon a lumberjack camp and was rescued. Against all odds, Julianne returned to the same research station, later becoming a renowned zoologist. Turns out, surviving the Amazon wasn't just a chapter of her life, It was her origin story. All right, guys, now let's talk about number 3, the real Lord of the Flies. In 1965, 6 Tongan schoolboys, bored out of their minds at a strict Catholic boarding school, decided to escape to Fiji, or anywhere far away. They borrowed a fisherman's boat, but their adventure went awry when a storm destroyed their sails and rudder. After drifting for 8 days without food or water, the boys spotted a deserted island on the horizon. Unlike the chaos of Lord of the Flies, they worked together to survive. They built a garden, set up a water collection system, and created a shelter. The boys even managed to resolve conflicts with a communal approach to leadership. For 15 months, they thrived until a passing fisherman discovered and rescued them. Their story is a far cry from the fairy tale of savagery. These boys demonstrated that cooperation, resilience, and hope can lead to survival. It's a tale of survival and humanity, reminding us what can happen when people work together under dire circumstances. Number 2, the Titanic Baker. Charles Jaugen, the Titanic's chief baker, survived the infamous 1912 disaster in a way that feels almost unbelievable, and you can call him lucky. When the ship began sinking, Jaugen refused to board a lifeboat, giving his spot to others. Instead, he calmly returned to his cabin and had a few stiff drinks, just in case. As the ship sank, he threw around 50 deck chairs into the icy Atlantic to help others use them as flotation devices. When the Titanic finally went under, Jaugen rode it down like a pro and ended up floating in the freezing water. He spent several hours in the sub-zero ocean before being rescued, seemingly unaffected by the hypothermia that claimed so many others. Many believe his alcohol consumption helped insulate him against the cold and fear. Jaugen's story is both inspiring and surreal, proving that even in the most tragic circumstances, staying calm and maybe a little whiskey can make all the difference. Number 1, the tornado survivor. Matt Suter was 19 when he became an unexpected tornado record holder. In 2006, a massive tornado struck his Missouri home, picking him up and flinging him an incredible 1,307 feet, nearly a quarter mile, before dropping him in a field. Miraculously, Matt walked away with only minor injuries and a very bizarre story. As the tornado hit, Suter recalls the deafening roar before the mobile home he was in exploded. Just before being sucked out, a lamp struck him in the head, knocking him out cold. Talk about rude timing. When he came to, he was lying in a field wearing nothing but his underwear, scratched and bruised but alive. Tornado researchers consider his survival miraculous, and Matt holds the record for the longest distance traveled by a human in a tornado. He's basically a living weather phenomenon. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon in the next one.